provided no reason other than to say that in terms of Section 93(1) of the Constitution, it says prerogative to remove me from the position.
I understand that maybe the way Whitfield went about it might have been wrong. You're going to keep all the other culprits of people that are held in corruption. That makes absolutely no sense to me.
I hope that the DA will realize that they're not really the kingmakers that they assume themselves to be.
So pulling out from the dialogue, that leaves the DA voters with no views within the dialogue.
Unity within the government of national unity. It's topical, and it starts right now. A very good evening to you, South African, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical, our digital audience with us tonight. There they are. They will weigh in terms of some of the burning questions for our guest in a short while. The headline from this weekend, the Democratic Alliance will remain in the government of national unity, but they've withdrawn from the national dialogue and resolved to, and I quote, vote against the budgets of corruption-accused ministers. Now, the African National Congress says it has taken note of the DA's threat not to support key budget votes and that such actions are not only disruptive, but undermine the very spirit and functioning of the GNU. How did we get here? It is not a common practice for the president to give reasons for hiring and firing. However, this time the president did regarding the Whitfield firing. Andrew Whitfield, now former Deputy Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. DA leader John Steenhuisen called it, and again I quote, a calculated political assault on the second largest party in the governing coalition. The DA then issued a 48-hour ultimatum to the president. Fire certain ministers and deputy ministers implicated in corruption or else. President Ramaphosa said Mr. Whitfield was removed as the deputy minister because he undertook an international visit without getting permission, going on to say that all international travel by members of the executive must always be undertaken with the express permission of the president. Question: is there any basis for suggestions that the dismissal of the former deputy minister is related to any other reason than his failure to receive permission to travel and adhere to the rules and established practices expected of members of the executive of this Republic of South Africa? Now, the president feels there's no other basis. The DA feels otherwise. So what does this all mean in the greater scheme of things? We will discuss. It leads us to the question of the week, and we're asking you, what are your views on the state of the GNU following the fallout around the axing of Deputy Minister Andrew Whitfield? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this matter at SABC News_TV. Let's walk and talk. Let's get you context with a better mind than mine, answering some of the pertinent questions in terms of consequences. What sort of consequences will there be when the DA pulls out from the national dialogue? We'd love to hear your thoughts once again at SABC News_TV. Perspective coming up. All right, let's get you some context, and as always, we turn to the magic wall, what we know and why it matters. My guest tonight, SABC News senior politics reporter, Samkele Maseko. Good to have you, better mind.
Very
Yes,
good evening to you.
Right, let's tee it up for the audience. for context purposes, give us the balance of power here within the GNU.
If you look at the balance of power, the ANC was at 55%. If you look at the number of seats, it's 287 within the National Assembly. ANC is about 159, the Democratic Alliance, second biggest political party. But the influence of the DA is being dwindled by smaller political formations, particularly if you look at that second budget that was tabled by the Minister of Finance, Enoch Godongwana. It was passed without the support of the Democratic Alliance, meaning if the DA were to leave, your Action SA comes to the fore, your Rise Mzansi is already within this particular coalition, and other political parties, and you also bring in, if the DA leaves, an economic freedom fighters. It still gives the government of national unity about 56-54% of the electorate within to have a majority within the National Assembly. So the influence of the Democratic Alliance was severely dwindled by the introduction of these smaller political parties in the statement of intent. So they are not as much as a big player as they think they are. Yes, they are the second biggest political formation and the government of national unity, but their influence is very minimal if you look at the policy perspective that have been chosen by President Ramaphosa, which has been more radical actually than the previous years where the ANC was more dominant within government alone. But this time around, with the DA within the government of national unity, the ANC was still able to push radical transformative policies that are against the economic policies of the Democratic Alliance. So I would say that their influence is overrated.
Right. Let's talk hypothetical situation. I say hypothetical because, as you know, yesterday they made it clear that they want to remain within the GNU. If, though, they decide eventually to leave, how does it play out?
If they decide to leave, for instance, you heard the Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, speaking at the Artam Regional Conference, that there are many political parties at the doorstep that are literally knocking. I can even say that the Economic Freedom Fighters has one foot in the door. They're just waiting for a Freedom Front Plus, a Democratic Alliance in the main to leave out of the government of national unity, and they would then come into the fore. So the DA, yes, they do have significant numbers to pass certain budgets within the National Assembly, but that has also been shown that without them, budgets can still be passed with smaller political parties. You've seen former President Mbeki has been very vocal to say that the ANC should have gone for a minority government, a demand and supply vote that the EFF has with some of political parties that you've seen at a local government level. So the DA, yes, they do want to stay, but they themselves are heavily divided. But there are other political parties at the doorstep literally knocking.
Right. I wonder, look, there's been a number of issues. Bella, the budget, as you mentioned, now the Whitfield issue. I wonder what would be the red line, you know, for the Democratic Alliance to eventually leave the GNU, but they have to replace a deputy minister. I wonder, as well, the president saying, look, we took out one of your ministers, replaced it with another DA minister. Did that ameliorate the situation?
In a way, it did. But the only problem is that as much as it ameliorated the situation, the Democratic Alliance is heavily divided. You've got a core of Helen Zille that wants out of the government of national unity, saying that the statement of intent that was signed is not even worth the paper it's written on. And on the other hand, you've got those in the DA who've tasted state power, who no longer want to leave. They know the influence that government has. And that essentially tells you that the DA, having divided in the nature that it's divided, it has pretty much become non-functional, like an ANC, NEC that fails to take decisions. The DA FedEx failed to take a drastic decision, despite the ultimatum that if you don't reverse this decision to fire Deputy Minister Andrew Whitfield within 48 hours, there would be severe repercussions. But the question is, if the DA is not going to vote for ANC-led ministry budgets like Human Settlements, Tembisi Milane, you go to other ministries like Dr. Nobuhle Nkabane at Higher Education, will the ANC MPs on the 27th of July also vote for DA-headed ministries on their particular budgets? So it is going to be a stalemate where you will find the ANC going to smaller parties to pass their particular budget, and the DA may have issues trying to woo other political formations within the government of national unity to pass their budget. You've seen Gayton McKenzie of the Patriotic Alliance, Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture within the country, saying that the DA must stop threatening the ANC and threatening coalition partners of the GNU because they want to act as an opposition and as a government at the same time. They must decide whether they're in opposition or they're in government. So it's going to be very difficult for the Democratic Alliance to pass these particular ministry budgets if they continue to have a hardened stance, as we've seen the chief whip of the ANC, Mtumzeni Ntuli, coming out clear that it's reckless and unfortunate for the DA to take such a stance.
Right. Helen Zille yesterday at the press conference mentioning the statement of intent, in particular clause 18 and 19 in terms of the sufficient consensus that exists. But I wonder how much does this consensus extend to the president having to consult before he makes a decision on hiring or firing?
The first and foremost issue, this statement of intent is unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional. The prerogative of the president is not dependent on any paper that is not derived from the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. This coalition agreement is a coalition of political parties, of political elites in a corner that is unconstitutional, that will not hold water in any court of law. If it comes to comparing it to the Constitution of the country, yes, it is a governing aspect of the government of national unity, but quite frankly, it does not hold water. For instance, the president appoints deputy ministers, as well. The president assigns their powers and functions. The president may dismiss them if necessary. This is a constitutional prerogative of the president that the DA seems to now question about, saying that he hides under this presidential prerogative that he has, but it's constitutional. The DA prides itself as a party that defends the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. They cannot usurp the powers of the president, whether they like it or not, unless they go and change the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. The statement of intent does not supersede the presidential prerogative under Section 91, subsection 2, that the president enjoys. So as much as they want to have power, the statement of intent, they say it does not hold water, it's not worth the paper it's written on, and quite frankly, they are correct, because it is not a legally binding document.
The timing of hiring and firing is also the president's prerogative, correct? Because I think that's a sticky point in this whole saga.
It is. The timing of this issue, the issue is, I've never heard Deputy Minister Andrew Whitfield complain about corruption, particularly when it comes to the lotto awarding contract that the DA says he was fighting, that particular corruption of the Caesar Khaya Holdings contract that is supposedly has friends of Deputy President. I use supposedly because it's never been proven in a court of law. Yes, there are pictures of all of them together, but the issue is he's never spoken out about it, particularly Moses Tembe, the sister of the wife of Deputy President Paul Mashatile, and the entire conglomerate of people involved within that particular contract. He's never spoken out openly about it. It's only now that it's also suspect that the timing with the president firing Deputy Minister Andrew Whitfield, it coincided with these revelations coming out of that particular lotto tender that has been awarded to supposed buddies of the Deputy President of South Africa, Paul Mashatile, who's denied that he has some sort of beneficial relationship with Moses Tembe, despite there being reports that he stayed at Moses Tembe's home, a house in KwaZulu-Natal for 7 days during the ANC manifesto launch in KwaZulu-Natal. So there is a lot of suspect and questions on that particular contract that needs to be answered, but you cannot hide disobeying the president of the country. You've seen historical context. Winnie Madikizela Mandela was fired by President Mbeki for President Nelson Mandela for disobeying the president and traveling. You've seen Malala Routledge as well being fired by the former President Thabo Mbeki on the same issue. So there is precedence that is there. But the president must also act on supposed dodgy ministers, particularly Nobuhle Nkabane of the African National Congress at Higher Education. You've seen SASCO, the African Students Congress organization, calling out for her to be fired as well. Then we've got allegations against Thembi Simelane on VBS, David Mahlobo, who's been cleared on a technicality by the ANC's International Disciplinary Committee. Those are still ongoing. Some of them have gone to review the state capture report that implicates them in wrongdoing.
What's been, just as we wrap up, the reaction been to the DA's press conference yesterday within political circles, within the people that you talk to, how they're retaliating against the decision by the president?
You've seen the likes of Gayton McKenzie of the Patriotic Alliance. He said it's a joke. You've seen the African National Congress saying that the DA is playing games. Some of the DA's biggest supporters on X have come out openly to ask, what is the DA doing? I've seen prominent business people on X as well asking, what is the DA actually doing here? I would say, sitting at home, layman's person, the DA has egg on its face on this particular issue. You can't issue an ultimatum, and when you need to take the ultimate decision, you pull back and withdraw. It means you are indecisive, you are directionless, and you don't know what you're actually doing within the government of national unity. You cannot always hide under the issue of the markets, the economy, this will crash, this will happen. But ultimately, You also cannot say you've achieved more in 8 months in government or so than 30 years of democratic rule. That is scientifically impossible. So though political talk of the Democratic Alliance yesterday was hollow, it was shallow, it was intellectually inept, but it also speaks to a party heavily divided that does not know how to operate in government at a national level and is faced with a number of bottlenecks that are there within government. So I can effectively say that the DA's press briefing yesterday effectively showed a directionalist party when it comes to government, heavily divided at a cul-de-sac, that it must then ultimately choose, that they are at a crossroads. Do we continue being within this government of national unity where we are seemingly getting nothing on a policy perspective and direction of the country, or do we ultimately leave and become an opposition that we've been and doing brilliantly so for the past 30 years? Currently, they are at that particular crossroads.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
For your perspective. Samkele Maseko, SABC News senior politics reporter there, giving us his take, his perspective on this matter. Now, I want to get your take. Our regular Word on the Street feature took to various streets, seeking diverse insights and perspectives on this topic. And this is what you had to say.
We have members in parliament who are open that they've committed corruption. They've been charged with corruption, and now you're going to go ahead and axe a guy who's like not in that kind of sphere of people.
Pulling out from the dialogue, it means we are pulling out the views of those who voted for us. That leaves the DA voters with no views within the dialogue. But that should invite, it leaves a vacuum. It should invite other political parties that are not within the GNU to say, here's an opportunity to come with your views and represent your people. Maybe you can do better with this GNU.
If there's going to be a firing, hire the relevant person.
I do think that the ANC will be able to pull together other parties to assist them and to continue with a government of national unity. And I hope that the DA will realize that they're not really the kingmakers that they assume themselves to be.
I do think it's time to do a reshuffle under the new GNU. Reason being because obviously when there's too much of people in power from one organization, it can be an imbalance of power rather than a balance of power.
It's sad, I mean, it's been almost a year and, things were rocky and, not smooth sailing. We thought, I mean, it's like any relationship, any marriage, it's got an up and downs. It's unsaid that, the minister has been sacked, but we don't know what the future holds. But my prayer is for the sake of the country that, the parties find each other and, they move ahead.
We thank you very much indeed for your comments on this matter. Let's get the discussion on the road. We shall see. 3 of the most loaded words in politics, right? What would be the consequences of whatever the DA has decided to do? In studio, Professor Susan Booysen, Wits University Emeritus Professor and Research Consultant. Thank you very much indeed, Prof, for joining us. Up on your screen, independent analyst Khaya Sithole. Appreciate your better mind on this program, sir. As well as we have the digital audience. Let's get your take, let's get your questions to clarify some of the context that we put forward today. Prof, let me just start with you. Was the firing of a deputy minister ever going to rank as a deal breaker for the DA?
Probably not. But the coalition government has, and even if I hear the ANC is denying again through its spokesperson that it is actually a coalition, but the coalition government has probably had so many crises that each time a new crisis arises, they have to get new ammunition. And this was ammunition. The fact that this firing only happened several months after the event, and there was complete silence from President Ramaphosa in that period, but now it is used, make me think that it is part of the ammunition to either help deal with a crisis or to help provoke a crisis. And given that the ANC, apparently it's approaching its National Executive Committee meeting middle of July. NEC that is very divided, even the top 7 in the ANC is divided. We've heard, yes, the DA is divided too, obviously, but in this case, I will see the approach to the NEC, and apparently the NEC is divided about 60-40 in favor of, was at the last count. Maybe that is shifted, and maybe President Ramaphosa is under pressure now to show that he is not just taking whatever the DA is dishing out, that he is acting. And in a way, the different building blocks here, there's a firing, there is the potential action on budget votes, there's a potential motion of no confidence. All of these pieces are being stacked up to make it look like the ANC is probably hoping, once again, that the DA will dismiss itself from this coalition.
Where does this put this move by the president? Where does it put him within his party?
It probably will help him deal with criticism from within his own party, will probably help strengthen his position in his party. To show that, yes, it is not just on the DA's terms. I don't think anybody has ever thought it's just on the DA's terms. But the DA has been pushing and has been quite assertive that they want more power, that it is a coalition is by definition, and they've been asking for it. More power sharing, evidence, more insight, more responsibility, and more recognition. But the ANC doesn't like that. The ANC plays this role as a big power holder, as the party that has got alternatives. And it sees the DA as one alternative, the other one possibly the EFF, and maybe a top-up of other parties, or just what I call the VAT coalition, where we saw that the ANC can muster together, if the conditions are right and if the issue is right, they can probably get about a 52% majority. But given that that kind of majority will probably include Action SA and other small parties, that will continuously come with policy demands. It will not be an easy coalition to govern with. Obviously, yes, that option of minority government, an occasional top-up is also a possibility. But the ANC has really been asserting itself over the coalition and trying to make it clear that it actually has got the power. Unlike in the aftermath of the VAT crisis, there were several points made by Cyril Ramaphosa, by Fikile Mbalula, by Enoch Godongwana, so that's where they said they had learned from that crisis, and that lesson they learned, they said, was that there has to be more consultation. In that context, I had not quite expected the current set of circumstances to build up to the crisis that we have at the moment.
Khaya Sithole, what have we learned from this build-up? It's been a year of this marriage, the GNU marriage. Is it until death to us part, in sickness and in health, or are we heading to Splitsville? If you can unmute, Khaya. There we go.
Thank you. So I think it's quite important for us to remember that the Democratic Alliance proposition when they got into the GNU was that they said they felt that they were duty-bound to save the country by preventing what they said would be a doomsday alliance if the MK party or the EFF were to go into partnership with the ANC. So whenever there are these moments where suddenly there is a dispute or there's a difference of opinion and people suddenly assume that the DA is going to walk out, my first question will be, well, how does the DA reconcile the fact that they said that their role is to protect us all from this doomsday versus them using petty issues as a basis for a walkout? And I think over the year, what we've seen is that this relationship has probably had three very distinct phases. The first phase related to the type of laws that had already been approved by the previous ANC-led parliament that the DA had objected to, and they were hoping that the president wouldn't sign them into law. But of course, there was no legal basis to prevent him from doing that. So some of those laws were indeed passed, and they simply said that we thought you'd consult us, but there was no legal directive that forced them to do so. What then happened is that after this marriage had been put together, he then signed into law a couple of bills that the DA still felt that, look, now that we're part of the same negotiation setup, surely you should have consulted us. And then the president simply said that, look, I might give you 30 days to tell me more on Bella, but there was nothing he could do about that. And it was only at the budget where it was a brand new process where the DA then felt that, look, if we are going to lend some substance into this idea that we're in this together, probably we should be able to push back on this one. And they did largely succeed, because that's why we ended up with 3 separate tablings of the budget. But the key issue here is that if the DA then insists that it should be the senior partner but beyond the ANC in this particular alliance, it needs to convince the ANC. But what they keep doing now is they keep threatening to walk out with the hope that the ANC is going to yield on particular things. And the ANC simply doesn't want to do that. So I think it's been a very complicated relationship, but at no point in time in the past week did I think that the dismissal, a legitimate dismissal of a deputy minister, will be the reason that the DA walks out. They said that we have a 40-hour ultimatum. I didn't take it seriously, because can you imagine just how ridiculous it would be for a party that has tolerated so many other difficult and substantively important issues to then say that, oh, because you decided to dismiss someone who broke the rules, which he has admitted that he's broken them, then we're going to walk out of the GNU. It was never going to happen. So I do think that the only time that we have a risk of the GNU falling apart is ahead of either the local government elections or a national election, which means that it must happen at a time where there is a much narrower window for the DA to explain itself to its voters. And what that means is that if the DA walks out, its voters are going to ask a simple question of, well, you said you were there to rescue South Africa. Why did you then walk out on your own terms instead of being forced out? So you can only explain that if you have a looming election where you then say, guys, we're only in this to prove that we are an autonomous a party that still represents your interests. We think we've done what we could during this electoral cycle. We now need you to give us a unilateral mandate. So that's the only time where the risk of them walking out is there. But until then, the DA is stuck in this marriage.
I wonder how their constituency will react to voting against certain budgets. Say, for instance, if they go against human settlement or go against higher education, 2 big portfolios that will have repercussions down the line. What do you think reaction to that is going to be?
I think their constituency might appreciate the political optics of it, but substantively, government still has to proceed. And at some point in time, there will either be a meeting of the minds between the DA and the ANC, or indeed the ANC will go fishing across the aisle for votes, as it did in the second iteration of the budget. So I think what the DA will do is that they'll simply say that we want to highlight that, and this is a legitimate issue, that we think the president is being a bit hypocritical in that when you look at the spectrum of transgressions that might have been committed by various cabinet members and deputy ministers, surely the idea that somebody traveled the country without permission is not at the top of the hierarchy. It is a transgression, but it's not at the top of the hierarchy. So it is this hypocrisy that they're calling out. But to then threaten to paralyze particular departments and to paralyze particular governments, that is equally problematic, because what you then have to ask is to say, well, what happens if the ANC then says, we'll do a minor reshuffle and then we'll put an DA minister in charge of this particular department that you've decided to paralyze? What then happens then? So I think it's the petty politics that are born out of the DA's frustration in the sense that it feels that the president should have been a bit more lenient. I think the question of consultation is completely at the discretion of the president. They feel that he should have been a bit more lenient, and he was not. And I think obviously at this stage, they want to be able to keep reminding us that, look, we are not beholden to the ANC. We do not belong to the ANC. We're able to challenge the ANC at times when we wish to do so. But in this instance, Steenhuisen did indeed go a bit draconian. I mean, he even said that this would be the greatest political mistake in the history of South Africa. What it either means he's got a very poor understanding of South Africa's political history, or he was just grandstanding. I mean, that was just pointless. And the president did stand his ground, and then he said, well, show me where I got it wrong. The Constitution enables me to dismiss deputy ministers and ministers at my own discretion, and he's done so. And in this instance, it was a deputy minister who had actually erred. So it wasn't a random, it wasn't an arbitrary decision. It was a legitimate decision, and the president said, well, give me an alternative name. But the DA didn't didn't say that. They simply made it sound like the president had gone rogue.
I need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we want to find out from you the state of the GNU. What's your take on how the sequence of events unfolded, leading to what we're currently dealing with? We'll also hear from our digital audience, get their questions. More next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. The question of the week we're asking you, what are your views on the state of the GNU following the fallout over the axing of Deputy Minister Andrew Whitfield? We'd love to hear your thoughts at SABC News_TV is where we're at. Let's go to our digital audience, get their take on this. Questions for our guest as well. Tabile, let's hear from you.
Greetings to the SABC, to the fellow panelists and the audience. I found this quite interesting because in general, when we're speaking about coalition politics or the GNU, there are going to be divisions with it. And I really found it interesting that this specific issue in terms of the deputy minister being fired was the one that's causing the rift. So I think I've just actually asked the fellow panelists that in general, when we're looking at the GNU and how it's done so far, and this decision that's been taken now, how would you say the balance of power is, or what has it revealed basically between the presidency and in general the coalition partners?
Yeah. Thanks, Sabila. Let me throw that to Professor.
Yes, the balance of power between them. The President and the ANC with him have really grabbed a lot of the power. They acted as if they had actually won an outright majority. Yes, in many systems, having the biggest proportion of the vote would mean you have the right of government, but not in South Africa. So they really, I was surprised at the time when the coalition was formed. The vehemence, the certainty with which they just grabbed the power and ran with it. That was obviously easy because the ANC is so well established, entrenched in state power. And being the biggest party, they were ready, and that is to the credit of the ANC. At that moment, the election result came last year. They were ready to run with the result and convene the meetings and take the initiative in that. And through that, they really established themselves as the leader of this coalition. And they haven't looked back. And yes, the fact that they have alternatives helps quite a lot in that process. And at every turn in the practical aspect of this coalition government, the ANC has actually come out on top. Even if the DA has called a halt to the budget, but the ANC, they made a few compromises, made concessions, and then they did come out on top again and again ran with that. So it is very often, it is a bit, where is it going in the balance? But then the ANC, time after time, has managed to swing it in its favor again.
And now, Khaya, in terms of this balance, we might get a new political party, courtesy of one Floyd Shivambu. I wonder, where are we in this period now in South Africa in terms of our politics?
If we do get a new political party from Floyd Shivambu, remember, it doesn't come into play until you get to 2029, when obviously there might be a reconfiguration of whatever the new coalition looks like at that point in time. But I do think that what we still have is, again, really four big parties, four leading parties, the EFF and the MK being the other two, who each individually have significant divergences in ideological orientation amongst themselves, which simply means that if this particular alliance breaks up, the question of whether the ANC could ever partner with the MK party comes down to a question of personalities. It's going to be President Jacob Zuma versus President Ramaphosa, and I do not foresee a reconciliation between those two anytime soon. When it comes to the question of the EFF, it is the EFF which, ironically, when Floyd Shivambu was at the epicenter of it, that simply said that, look, this is how we're going to negotiate with the ANC. And some of those particular issues were issues that the ANC felt that, look, if we sit on this just to get them into the House, we'll never be in control of the political agenda. So it's still very difficult to imagine how the ANC could navigate a post-GNU coalition without the DA. What again probably materializes, as Professor Susan mentions, is that you may end up with the structure that the way the ANC says that, look, at 40%, this is where we are, but in instances where the most contentious decision of recent times had to be made, which was the budget, we were able to fish across the pond for enough votes for us to get it across the line. So perhaps we do not need to be beholden to this particular democratic alliance, and also leverage what we do at sub-national level, which is either at municipal or at provincial government, to then get these other parties to be on board with us, which is something that must be leveraged in a much better way. I don't think we've done a good job of that since the 20 it's in the 2021 local government elections. So if you can leverage that subnational political agenda to then buy you some breathing space at national, then you can actually manage this coalition without the Democratic Alliance, particularly if they keep threatening to walk out. You must simply then say, well, we accept your invitation. We're still going to learn to govern the country, particularly if we get a budget across, we can get everything else across.
Let's get more questions from our digital audience. Asitandile, let's hear from you.
Hi. So a question that this whole row between the in the GNU raises for me is, how does this now impact the investors? How does this impact how we are to attract investors into the country, and how this impacts, we saw just a few weeks ago, the ANC and the DA come together to go meet the US president and call upon the US to invest in South Africa, and calling upon the international community to also invest in South Africa. So they showed that unity, but then now a few weeks later, we see this disunity within the GNU. And how does that impact investment and investor confidence in South Africa?
Good, I'll mark that question. Tina, let's hear from you.
Thanks, Blaine. Thank you, guests. Good evening, everybody. Yes, I've been listening to this GNU thing, and I've been listening to the DA criticizing the ANC, and I've been listening to the ANC backing up and doing things that the DA doesn't like. And you know what, to me, it seems like two dogs fighting over a bone. One is stretching and one is pulling the whole time. And every time I've noticed in our government, in our country, when something like that happens, you can go and look behind the screen, something sinister is going on in the back. So my point is, or my thing is, that I wonder if this ANC is not busy trying to get the DA out of the coalition because he has got other plans. Or perhaps with the DA being of such a small issue, there are so many more bigger issues in this country to fight about than a deputy minister being fired, which he could have done and spoke to Ramaphosa and said to him, listen, sir, I think we could have done this a bit better way, whatever the case may be. So my question is, shouldn't there be another election if the DA falls out of this GNU?
Okay. Thanks, Tina. We'll put that to our guests. Let's hear from Ako.
Hello, everybody. For me, I think this is not just a political issue, but it is a service risk delivery. Because the president acted out of constitution using their legal right, same as the minister leaving the country, that was very unprocedural. And because of that, of that, can everybody hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. As I was saying that this is not just a political issue, but it is a service delivery risk, and that the fact that the president left, the minister left the country, it was very unprocedural, and the president acted upon his right and following the constitution to remove the president. But the issue here is that the DA now is acting upon its political interest and not in principle, because if they had considered the minister not leaving without getting an approval from the president, we wouldn't be having this issue we are having right now. And this is a risk to society, not to just the GNU. This might lead to the collapse, and then this is just opening great political issues and such issues to the governance of South Africa, which I think the GNU needs a formal coalition agreement, which will align with the constitution, because the government did act according to the constitution, but because the GNU lacks accountability, transparency, and a clear form of coalition agreements, that's why we have such an issue today.
Ako, thank you very much indeed. Let's, before we take a break and get some responses, Ntatua, let's hear from you.
My question is it correct to assume that the alliance between ANC and DA is very strong? Because firstly, DA, we know that DA is not leaving the alliance because their number one agenda and policy is to EFF to be in the government. Secondly, ANC knows that we're in the country that is market driven, and the market is in the hands of white capital. So they know that it is in their interest to actually be in this alliance. This alliance is actually favored by the market. So I feel like they are actually in. They are very stable. The alliance is very stable.
Right.
Thank you.
Ndatua, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to come back to Dimokatso as well as Sithole and Funeka in a short while, as well as get some responses from our guests. We need to take a quick break. We'll be back shortly. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical, Unity within the GNU. Very much topical, very much in the sharp focus. I want to get straight to our digital audience, get a few more questions before we get some responses from our guests. Dimokatso, let's hear from you, and then Sithole and Funeka. Dimokatso?
Yes, thank you very much, Ben. I think we need to kind of make a critical assessment of what history has taught us in regards to a coalition government within the Democratic Republic of South Africa. We are at a place where the balance of power and influence within the government of national unity will always come into play. And also the reasons for forming a coalition government with all the parties involved within the coalition government need to be interrogated further, because we're at a place in which all parties that are involved within the government of national unity are unfortunately not going to leave. And I think Khaya has made a great point to say that probably in the next coming national election that we will see an exit by the DA. But unfortunately, I think that the DA is well aware that South Africa is within a state of coalition governance for a couple of elections to come. So the DA isn't going anywhere. And my assumption is that it might happen that even in the 2029 national elections, the DA is still going to remain open to be in a coalition government with the ANC, depending on the electoral outcome, therefore.
Dimokatso, thanks. I think let's park it there. Sithole, let's hear from you.
Thank you, Blaine. Good evening. I think more than anything, it's clear that the president acted correctly to fire the DA, and there's no question about it. The problem I find is that the DA now raises certain questions regarding the political motivations of the ANC, perhaps suggesting that maybe they're planning something, as Tina has suggested here. Mine is to say, as Khaya has alluded to, because the DA is so directionless, if indeed the ANC is planning to remove or have the DA walk out of the GNU, perhaps it is in the best interest of the country. Because equally, when the DA, or if the DA withdraws from the national dialogue, there is a very big chunk of the electorate that is now isolated in terms of their views. And the fact that they're threatening to boycott the budget isolates them as the very same doomsday element within government that they said in elections they are trying to avoid. So I think the DA is really a danger to the GNU, if anything, because of the lack of direction that they are exercising here. And perhaps,
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to take two quick questions, as brief as possible, before we get some responses. Funeka and Clayton. Funeka, to you first.
I think my main question is just what exactly would it take for the DA to exit the GNU? Because from what I can see, the GNU isn't any closer to a collapse as it was at its inception.
Yeah.
And it will probably continue to remain that way until the next election. So what exactly would it take for the DA to exit as they continue to make these threats that they will one day?
Funeka, thank you very much indeed. Clayton?
Good evening. My question is, since we know that the Deputy Minister of the DA actually went ahead and continued for his trip to the US, but my question now is, why is then they raising this issue only when they see that now this Deputy Minister is going to be fired or is fired? So does it mean that they're okay with corruption, or are they only fighting corruption now or raising it because now the Deputy Minister is in trouble of being fired, or the whole process of him being taken out from his position? Are they okay with corruption, but do they only feel attacked when they themselves are actually being removed from certain positions? Thank you.
Thanks, Clayton. Professor, let me bring you in to get some responses with regards to some of the questions. Under what scenario do you see the DA voluntarily walking out of this?
No scenario. I think it's going to take a lot to get a DA out of there. They have probably said that in as many words. I think of some of Helen Zille's statements in that regard. But as an analyst, I think about it, they really, in a way, no matter how much they are undermined and criticized in there, they have got a great platform in there. Much more of a platform to voice their opinions, to make themselves known to an electorate than they would have had they been an opposition party. So, and we've seen in a few public opinion polls, and reliable ones that have become available, the DA has been scoring. A very recent one shows the DA-ANC has also been putting in a bit of recovery, but the DA is still the party in the coalition government that has scored the best out of it. So I think it is going to take almost anything or nothing, however you want to formulate it, to get them out of there. I think they are sitting there and they're clinging to that. And in the last few days, we've heard them say that they'll make it as difficult as possible for the ANC to get rid of them.
Khaya, do you think the markets, investors have already factored in a possible breakup? What would the impact be if there's certain ructions within the GNU?
So I think when we speak about the market conversation, we probably do need to distinguish between two types. And what we have is firstly those that lend money to South Africa, generally the bondholders. So what those who lend money to any country will do is that they always factor in political risk, and their assessment would be, look, if the ANC is in a co-governance model with the DA, then this is what is likely to happen. So therefore, this is what we expect the direction of policy making to be. And I think the reality here is that what we have in South Africa is probably a state where so many of the laws that were passed in ANC majority parliaments are here to stay, because if the DA objects to a particular law, the DA is still a 20% party. A 20% party is not going to change or overhaul the existing laws of the country. So what we really are going to be stuck with is a way of working well or working around what already exists. So if I'm a long-term investor, if I'm a bondholder, I work on the basis that what we have is likely to stay until there is another general election, and perhaps the balance of the scales shifts decisively in a way that would then enable any party that doesn't agree with the existing policies and the laws that have been put together by ANC-led governments to then overhaul them. So that's the first part. The second part that also tends to get conflated is the question of, foreign direct investors, in the sense of those who want to come and invest in South Africa. Now, for those investors, what they're looking at is the viability of the businesses that they can set up in South Africa. So what they tend to look for is basically, across the different markets where you can invest, where you get the best returns. And what those people do is that they consider those things long before you figure out who's going to run a government or not going to run a government. And the way in which they analyze the state of a nation or the investment climate in a country is quite removed from the question of who's the mayor of Johannesburg or who's in the partnership with the DA or the ANC. So what would have happened in a week like this, they would have then said, look, we think that even if the DA walks out of this, the type of policies that form the basis for our decision-making of our investment decisions are likely to remain intact for at least the next 3 or 4 years. So therefore, if we thought that this was good enough as a basis for us to invest, then we'll maintain that decision. But what tends to happen is that whenever there's a political noise and political hysteria, people immediately come up with this idea that investors are going to run away. Look, a responsible investor is not the one that puts up capital that they can remove the day after. A responsible investor is the one who takes a long-term view and says that in spite of the political dynamics and in a democracy, political shifts and political vicissitudes are indeed to be welcomed, because that's what distinguishes us from autocracies and dictatorships. So that person will then take a long-term view and still say, I think that this is a country worth investing in. So people tend to elevate the conversation, and then I ask, look, if you're the type of investor that gets swayed by the question of what happens in the corridors of Parliament or even in the Joburg Council from on a day-to-day basis, you're probably not the type of person who should be putting billions of rands into any country, because you clearly don't have a long-term view of anything.
Yeah. What about the idea that Tina raised, Professor, of getting another elections, a referendum of sorts? I guess basically alluding to the fact, throw it back to the people, let the people decide.
Well, if we have another election now, and I don't think that is required, we'll probably get the same kind of result. If you take the cue from the opinion polls, which roughly are on target. So a new election is not going to help us out of this. And I don't think it's justified to call a new election. That would be very disruptive at this stage. But one would simultaneously want to call on political parties to act in a mature, adult way and to stop being petty, to accept that they are in the same boat for the time being and that they have to make things work and try to accommodate one another. So I think that is a much better prospect than another election.
Right.
Another reshuffle of cabinet would also, I see people have mentioned that, would also absolutely go nowhere.
Khaya, the issue of moving forward with the current state of play, and I guess it talks to Ako's comment about this boils down to the people, it boils down to service delivery. You need mature politicians to take the plight or the concerns of people forward. How best can that be done? The statement of intent was brought up, clause 18, 19, the need for consensus. Does that need to be re-looked at in terms of that statement of intent?
Well, the problem with the statement of intent is that it did not translate onto a cogent or a tangible roadmap of how disputes need to be resolved. So what that statement of intent referred to was this idea of sufficient consensus. And what that simply means is that there was a universal acknowledgement at the inception of this alliance that clearly when you're putting together a marriage of so many diverse parties, you are never going to end up with everybody agreeing on the same thing. So the idea of consensus was simply to say, let us deliberate before a decision is made, but there isn't a single party with any veto power of a decision making, because otherwise you'd end up with a paralyzed government. What seems to have been then expected by the DA in particular is that if the basis for our engagement is the idea of sufficient consensus, then consultation is indeed the way things are going to be done. Every single critical decision is going to be subject to a consultation process until sufficient consensus is reached. In this instance, however, the dismissal, or rather the shuffling of a deputy minister, is not the type of decision that should be anywhere under that dimension. And what that simply means that this is not a policy decision. It is not a decision that sways the fate of the country. It's simply a matter of, look, we have rules of engagement as cabinet and deputy ministers, and this particular minister has broken the rules and he's acknowledged that he has done so. So all I'm asking you as the president of the country is to simply give me a replacement. So this is not a policy decision. It's simply a matter of personal shift. So the idea that it would now be subjected to the question of consensus and whether consensus was reached or not, that is ill-conceived in my view. This has nothing to do with this particular conversation. But what you need to be able to figure out is something that Helen Zille rightly acknowledges, in that, look, the president then said that we know that there's going to be disputes, so there must be some form of a clearinghouse. And what the clearinghouse mechanism is the type of thing that, if it worked well, wouldn't have had the budget fiasco, because what would have happened is that within the GNU, the ANC would have said, look, this is where we think we're going. This is what the budget proposal is. What do GNU members think? And they would have obviously made their inputs. And then either consensus would have been reached, which I doubt, or sufficient consensus in terms of their own statement of intent would have been reached, and then would have had that back and forth. But because that hasn't been done, or in the form that it's in, it's simply not working, you're going to end up with a lot more of these back and forth exchanges.
Right. Khaya Sithole, Professor Susan Booysen, thank you so much indeed. Time is never on our side, but value added, no doubt, food for thought. Digital audience, appreciate your questions as well. Thank you very much indeed for coming through. All right, before we go, here's my take. Look, there's a lot at play in South Africa. Questions around unity within the government of national unity. Who stays or goes? If you're looking at it from a purely numbers point of view, then there are plenty of options, right? Now there's a consultation process to see whether there's appetite for another political party, courtesy of one Floyd Shivambu and team. Yes, South African citizens have a constitutional right to form political parties. You have a right. But is it the right thing to do, given the state of play? Mr. Shivambu will soon find out. Keeping the GNU intact in its current form, is it the right thing to do? Reconfiguring the GNU, is it the right thing to do? What informs the answer to the question, is it the right thing to do? The simple answer is you, the voter. You got skin in the game. You voted them in. So whatever decisions these leaders make in some way or another has a bearing on your life and your family's life. Where am I going with this? The needs and concerns of the people of South Africa needs to be at the forefront of any decision-making process. During elections, if you stumped on improving the lives of communities, then that's what people will hold you accountable for. Put the people's needs at the forefront of any decision-making process. You don't want to play with legitimate pain. You don't want to play with legitimate frustration. You don't want to take them for granted. It's about doing what's right in between elections. That matters the most. And that's my take. If you missed anything on this program, then be sure to watch this episode of It's Topical on YouTube as well as SABC Plus. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Unwrap Africa next with Timbekile. Until next week, my friends, take care. Bye-bye.